This is a story about love, after everything. Tell me where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The night he decided to pretend he was nothing was the night he finally met someone who saw everything. The rain came down in steady sheets, turning the Manhattan sidewalk into a river of reflected neon and streetlight gold. And when the door of Harbor Street Grill swung open, a tall man stepped inside carrying the storm on his shoulders. His jacket was soaked through, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but even beneath the cheap fabric of a worn gray hoodie, there was something about the way he stood that didn't quite belong to a man who had nowhere else to go. Olivia Hayes noticed it immediately. She always noticed the details other people missed. The hostess glanced up, startled by the sudden gust of wind, but Olivia was already reaching for a clean towel from behind the counter. "Kitchen's still open for another 20 minutes, she said calmly, her voice warm but measured, the kind of voice that had learned how to steady a room. The man nodded, offering a faint, almost rehearsed smile. "I'm not here to eat," he said. "I heard you might need help. I'll wash dishes, take out trash, whatever pays cash." His name, at least for tonight, was Ethan Whitmore. To the world outside, he was the 42-year-old founder of Whitmore Technologies, a man whose net worth had been dissected in business magazines and whose photo had graced the covers of financial journals. But here, under flickering fluorescent lights and the scent of grilled onions and coffee, he was just another man claiming he'd lost everything. Olivia studied him for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to notice the watch 10 line on his wrist where something expensive had recently been removed, long enough to see that his hands, though steady, weren't the hands of someone accustomed to hourly wages, long enough to spot the shoes. Worn leather, yes, but Italian cut, $8,000 at least. She handed him the towel anyway. "You ever worked in a kitchen before?" she asked. "I'll learn fast." His answer came without hesitation. She nodded toward the back. "Apron's on the hook. Sinks through that door. We close at 10. No judgment. No sympathy. No curiosity. Just instructions." Ethan followed her into the kitchen, aware of something unfamiliar pressing against his ribs. It wasn't discomfort. It was uncertainty. He had spent the last 6 months testing women he dated, quietly observing how their eyes changed when they thought he wasn't looking, listening to how their tone shifted when they mentioned investment portfolios or private jets. He had grown tired of admiration that felt like negotiation. So he designed an experiment. Remove the wealth. Remove the headlines. See who remained. What he hadn't anticipated was that the first woman to look straight at him would also see straight through him. The dinner rush slowed, and the kitchen settled into the rhythm of clinking plates and running water. Ethan worked in silence, sleeves rolled up, hands submerged in soap and heat. He wasn't terrible at it. He just wasn't convincing. Every so often, he glanced toward the doorway where Olivia moved across the dining room floor with quiet efficiency. She balanced 3 plates on one arm, refilled coffee without interrupting conversations, smiled without overextending it. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the way that demanded attention, more in the way that commanded it without trying. Around 9:30, he made his move. He pulled a worn leather wallet from his back pocket and let it slip deliberately from his fingers near the prep table. It hit the floor with a soft thud. He waited. Olivia stepped into the kitchen a moment later, tying her apron strings tighter as she walked. Her eyes dropped to the floor, then to him. She bent, picked up the wallet, and opened it just enough to identify the owner. Inside, tucked carefully behind a few crumpled singles, was a thick stack of $100 bills. More than a dishwasher should carry. She closed it, walked toward him, and held it out. "You dropped this." Her tone didn't change. Ethan wiped his hands slowly. "Thanks," he said, watching her face for a flicker of reaction. There wasn't one. She paused, then did something he hadn't rehearsed for. She reached back into the open fold of the wallet, pulled out a single dollar bill, and pressed it gently into his palm before returning the rest. "You'll need bus fare," she said quietly. "Pride doesn't cover transportation." For the first time in years, Ethan Whitmore forgot what to say. She turned away before he could recover, grabbing a tray of clean glasses and heading back into the dining room. No lecture, no accusation, just a boundary drawn with surgical precision. He looked down at the single dollar resting against his skin. No one had ever taken money from him to teach him something. They usually asked for more. The rain continued outside, steady and relentless, but inside Harbor Street Grill, something had shifted. Ethan had walked in pretending to be nothing. Olivia had responded by treating him like someone worth correcting, not someone worth exploiting. And somewhere between the clatter of dishes and the quiet hum of closing time, the first crack appeared in the armor he had spent a lifetime building. By the time the clock above the soda machine blinked 10:05, the chairs were upside down on tables, and the last customer had stepped back into the rain, leaving only the low hum of the refrigerator and the scent of lemon disinfectant hanging in the air. Ethan dried his hands on a thin paper towel, aware that he had not checked his phone in 3 hours, a personal record in a life once measured by notifications and market fluctuations. Olivia moved through the dining room with a small clipboard, counting receipts, her brow slightly furrowed as she calculated tips in her head faster than most people could with a calculator. She did not look at him until she was finished. "You can clock out with Marcus," she said, nodding toward the cook who was locking the freezer. "Cash gets handed out on Fridays." "I was hoping for something tonight," Ethan replied carefully. "Just enough for a place to sleep." He watched her face for softness, for pity, for anything he could label as advantage. She leaned against the counter instead, crossing her arms loosely. "There is a shelter 2 blocks west on Fulton," she said. "They open at 11. It is clean. I volunteered there last winter." No hesitation. No invitation. Just information. Ethan slipped the single dollar she had given him into his pocket. "You do not seem surprised," he said. She tilted her head slightly. "About what?" "About me," he clarified. "Most people ask questions. Most people are bored," she replied. "I am not." She walked past him toward the employee lockers, then paused just long enough to add, "And you are not as good at pretending as you think." The words landed gently. Not cruel. Not mocking. Just accurate. Ethan felt something tighten. In his chest. In boardrooms, when someone challenged him, it came with strategy. Here, it came with calm. "Pretending to be what?" he asked, following her voice. She pulled her coat from the hook and shrugged into it. It was navy blue, slightly worn at the cuffs, but clean and carefully maintained. "Pretending to be invisible," she said. "You stand like a man who expects the room to adjust around him." He almost laughed. No one had ever described him that way to his face. "Maybe I used to," he admitted. "Maybe I lost everything." She stepped closer then, close enough that he could see the faint freckles across her nose and the steadiness in her eyes. "Losing money does not erase posture," she said softly. "It just reveals character." For a moment, the rain outside seemed louder, tapping against the windows like a quiet metronome. Ethan felt the urge to explain himself, to confess the experiment, to prove that he was not what she assumed. But that would defeat the point. Instead, he said, "Why do you volunteer at a shelter if you work double shifts?" "Because not everything is a transaction," she answered without pause. "Some things are practice." "Practice for what?" She considered him for a second, then smiled faintly. "For staying human." The lights above the counter flickered once as Marcus flipped the final switch. The room dimmed into shadow, leaving only the streetlights outside casting pale lines across the tile floor. Olivia grabbed her umbrella and headed toward the door. Ethan followed, unsure why he did. Outside, the air smelled like wet asphalt and distant coffee from the shop on the corner. She opened her umbrella and stepped into the rain. He did not have one. "The shelter is that way," she said, pointing west. "You will make it in 10 minutes. He hesitated. "And you?" "I live 3 blocks east." She began walking. After 2 steps, she noticed he was still standing there. "You are going the wrong direction," she said. "Maybe," he replied, taking a cautious step toward her side of the sidewalk. She stopped again, studying him in the glow of a passing taxi's headlights. "If this is another test," she said quietly, "you should know I do not compete for approval." The sentence was not defensive. It was firm. Ethan felt the weight of it. "It is not a test," he said, and for the first time that night, it was not entirely a lie. They walked in silence for half a block, the umbrella shielding her from most of the rain, while he accepted the rest without complaint. "You can stand under it," she said finally, shifting it slightly in his direction. "I am not fragile." He stepped closer, careful not to invade her space. The umbrella was small, forcing them into proximity that felt strangely intimate despite the absence of touch. He could smell faint lavender from her shampoo, subtle and unassuming. "Why give me the dollar?" he asked after a moment. She glanced at him sideways. "Because you wanted to see if I would take the bait." "And did you?" No, she said. I changed the rules. They reached her apartment building, a narrow brick structure with a flickering porch light and a chipped green door. She stopped at the steps. Good night, she said. Do not waste your bus fare. Olivia, he said before she could turn away. She waited. What if I told you I am not who you think I am? She held his gaze, rain sliding down the edge of the umbrella. I already know that, she replied. The question is whether you know who you are without the costume. She closed the umbrella, stepped inside, and let the door shut softly behind her. Ethan remained on the sidewalk, rain soaking through his hoodie, the $1 still warm in his pocket. For the first time in years, he did not feel in control of the narrative. And for reasons he could not fully explain, he did not want to be. The next morning arrived clear and cold, as if the storm had washed the city clean and left only sharp edges behind. Ethan had not gone to the shelter. Instead, he had walked the length of Fulton Street twice, the $1 still folded in his pocket, replaying Olivia's words with a precision that rivaled any investor briefing he had ever delivered. By sunrise, he had made a decision that surprised even him. He would return, not to win, not to reveal, but to understand. Harbor Street Grill smelled like coffee and toasted bread when he stepped inside at 8:15. The breakfast crowd was lighter, mostly construction workers and a few early freelancers hunched over laptops. Olivia stood behind the counter refilling mugs, her navy sweater replacing the waitress uniform from the night before. She noticed him immediately, but did not react. You are early, she said, sliding a plate of pancakes toward a customer without looking away from her task. Could not sleep, he answered. It was true, though not in the way she might assume. We do not open the kitchen for staff until 9, she said. I am not here to eat. That made her glance up. Her eyes assessed him in one clean sweep, taking in the same hoodie, now dry, the same posture, slightly less rigid. Then you are here to work, she concluded. If you will have me. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded toward the back. Apron is still where you left it. No lecture. No welcome. Just continuity. He tied the apron more confidently this time. The morning shift moved slower than dinner, but it required attention. He learned where the clean mugs were stacked, how to scrape plates without wasting food, how to move without disrupting the narrow rhythm of the kitchen. Olivia passed through twice without speaking, but each time her presence shifted the air slightly, as if the room calibrated itself around her quiet authority. Around 10:30, a delivery truck double-parked outside, blocking half the street. The driver argued with a customer over misplaced crates. Voices rose. Heads turned. Ethan instinctively stepped forward, ready to assert control the way he would in any boardroom. But Olivia beat him to it. She walked outside, hands tucked calmly into her coat pockets. She did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She simply listened. Within 2 minutes, the crates were moved, the driver apologized, and the street cleared. When she came back inside, she caught Ethan watching her. You were about to fix it, she observed. I am used to fixing things. With authority, she added. Or with money. He did not deny it. You fixed it without either. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. Not everything requires dominance, she said. Sometimes it requires patience. He considered that. In his world, patience was strategy. Here, it was character. At 11:45, the lunch rush began building. A young woman in a business suit stepped inside, scanning the room with distracted urgency. She glanced at Ethan briefly, then froze. Recognition flickered across her face. His pulse shifted. He knew that look. She approached cautiously. Excuse me, she said. Do I know you from somewhere? Olivia, wiping down a nearby table, looked up but said nothing. Ethan felt the experiment balancing on a thin wire. I doubt it, he replied evenly. I just started yesterday. The woman hesitated, then shook her head as if dismissing a memory. Sorry, she murmured, taking a seat by the window. When she turned away, Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Olivia stepped closer, lowering her voice just enough. Costume slip, she said. You should choose one you can carry. You are not curious, he asked quietly. About who I am. She folded a napkin precisely before answering. Curiosity is different from interest, she said. I am interested in how you treat people when no one is impressed. The words landed harder than any accusation. He watched her return to her work, greeting customers by name, remembering who preferred skim milk, who asked for extra syrup, who needed change broken into quarters for the parking meter. She moved through the room like someone building something invisible and steady. Near closing, an elderly man at the corner table struggled to count out enough cash for his sandwich. He came up short by a few dollars. Without hesitation, Olivia slid the remaining bills from the tip jar into the check presenter and pushed it back toward him. "It is covered," she said gently. "Next time, bring stories instead." The man's eyes softened with gratitude. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time. She had not looked around to see who was watching. She had not calculated the loss. She had simply decided. When the lunch crowd thinned, he approached her near the register. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "You could have told him to come back." She met his gaze steadily. "Because someday I might be the one who comes up short." He thought of his own accounts, diversified across continents, insulated from risk by teams of analysts. And yet, standing there, he felt closer to being exposed than he ever had in a shareholders' meeting. "What if I told you I could solve every financial problem this place has?" he said carefully. "What if I told you I do not need to be rescued?" she replied. No anger, no pride, just clarity. The afternoon light slanted through the front windows, casting long shadows across the tile. Ethan realized he had not thought about stock prices or quarterly reports once since stepping inside that morning. Instead, he was thinking about posture, about patience, about a $1 bill that still rested in his pocket like a reminder. He had come to test loyalty. Instead, he was being measured in ways he did not yet understand. And for the first time in years, the possibility of being seen without applause did not terrify him. It intrigued him. By the fourth day, the routine had begun to feel less like an experiment and more like a life he had temporarily borrowed. Ethan arrived before opening again, this time carrying a plain brown paper bag. He set it quietly on the counter while Olivia balanced the morning register. "Coffee beans," he said when she glanced at it. "From a place I used to like." She did not touch the bag immediately. "Used to," she repeated. "Before I lost everything," he replied, holding her gaze just long enough to test whether she would challenge him. She did not. Instead, she opened the bag, inhaled softly, and nodded once. "We will brew it for the staff," she said. "Customers pay for what is on the menu." The boundary was subtle but unmistakable. Generosity was welcome. Influence was not. The day unfolded steadily. Ethan worked without prompting now, anticipating where he was needed, learning the choreography of the narrow kitchen. He caught himself enjoying the physical rhythm of it, the simplicity of wiping a counter clean and seeing immediate results. There were no projections here, no forecasts, only effort and outcome. Around noon, Marcus stepped out back to take a call, leaving Ethan and Olivia alone near the prep station. She was slicing lemons with careful precision, each wedge identical. "Why are you still here?" she asked without looking up. "You told me about the shelter. I found it, and it was full." That part was true. He had gone after leaving her building 2 nights ago, more out of curiosity than necessity. "You could find something else," she said. "You do not strike me as someone who runs out of options." He watched the way her hands moved, steady and deliberate. "Maybe I am tired of options," he answered. She paused mid-slice, then resumed. "Options are not the problem," she said quietly. "Entitlement is." The words settled between them, not accusatory, just observational. Before he could respond, the bell above the door chimed. 2 men in tailored suits stepped inside, scanning the diner with mild confusion. Ethan recognized them instantly. Senior analysts from his company. Their presence hit him like cold air. They had found him. He turned slightly, angling his body away, but one of them locked eyes with him across the room. Recognition flared. "Mr. Whittam." The man stopped himself, glancing at Olivia. Ethan stepped forward quickly, lowering his voice. "You have the wrong person," he said evenly. The analysts hesitated. They were not accustomed to uncertainty. "Sir, the board is asking questions," one of them murmured. "You have been unreachable for 4 days." Olivia stood very still behind the counter, absorbing everything without reacting. Ethan felt the experiment collapsing in real time. "Send them an email," he said calmly. "Tell them I am taking personal leave." The men exchanged glances. "The acquisition meeting is tomorrow," the other pressed. "It is worth $200 million. The number hung in the air, absurdly out of place among chipped mugs and laminated menus. Ethan did not look at Olivia. "Reschedule it," he replied. "Or proceed without me." The analysts fell silent. They were witnessing something unprecedented. After a tense moment, they nodded and stepped back outside, dialing phones as they left. The bell chimed again. The diner returned to its usual hum. Ethan exhaled slowly. He turned toward Olivia, expecting anger, or disbelief, or triumph. She simply wiped the counter. $200 million, she said softly. That is a heavy thing to walk away from. It will still be there, he answered. Money usually is. She met his eyes then, fully. And what will not be there, she asked, if you keep running from it? The question cut deeper than the revelation. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I did not plan for you to find out like that. I found out the first night, she replied. Those men just confirmed it. He searched her face for resentment. Why did you not say anything? She considered him for a long second. Because I wanted to see if you would. Silence stretched between them, not hostile, but charged with truth. You are not poor, she continued gently. You are hiding. He felt the accuracy of it settle into his chest. And you, he said carefully, are not just a waitress. A flicker crossed her expression. I never said I was. Then what are you? She folded the dish towel neatly before answering. Someone who chose to stay, she said. When my father left, when my mother got sick, when bills stacked higher than pride, I stayed. I did not pretend to be smaller than I am. I just stopped performing. The simplicity of her confession steadied the room. Ethan realized that while he had been performing poverty, she had been practicing presence. I was going to tell you, he said quietly. Eventually. Eventually is a comfortable word, she replied. It delays accountability. He almost smiled despite himself. No one spoke to him like this. No one risked it. I thought if someone loved me without knowing, he began. She interrupted gently. Love is not a test you administer, she said. It is a truth you reveal. The late afternoon light filtered through the front windows again, warm and unassuming. Ethan felt the weight of the $1 still in his pocket, a reminder of the night this began. If I stop pretending, he asked softly, what happens then? Olivia held his gaze, steady and unafraid. Then we find out who you are, she said. Without the costume. For the first time since he walked into Harbor Street Grill, Ethan did not feel like he was running an experiment. He felt like he was standing at the edge of something honest. And honesty, he realized, required more courage than any calculated disguise ever had. The silence after her words did not feel fragile. It felt precise, like the moment before a decision becomes permanent. Ethan stood there longer than he meant to, aware that for the first time in his adult life, there was no strategy forming behind his eyes. No counteroffer. No contingency plan. Just truth, waiting. That evening, he did something he had not done in years. He went home. Not to the penthouse overlooking the river that had remained untouched since he walked out 4 days earlier, but to the townhouse in Brooklyn he had purchased quietly for his mother before she passed away. It was smaller, older. It smelled faintly of cedar and time. He stood in the living room and looked at the framed photographs on the wall. A younger version of himself in a graduation gown. His mother smiling with quiet pride. No headlines. No investors. Just beginnings. He pulled his phone from his pocket and stared at the string of unread messages. Board members. Lawyers. Analysts. He typed only 3 sentences. I will attend the meeting tomorrow. Delay any final signatures. Do not announce anything without me. Then he put the phone down and, for the first time in a long time, slept without the television humming in the background. The next morning, he arrived at Harbor Street Grill not in the hoodie, but in a simple navy sweater and dark jeans. No suit. No performance. Just himself. Olivia was outside adjusting a small chalkboard sign that listed the lunch special. When she saw him, she did not smile immediately. She studied him. He felt it. The way she measured posture, tone, intent. You changed, she observed. I stopped hiding, he replied. She nodded once, as if confirming a theory. That is a better look. He stepped closer, the early light catching in her hair. I am going to the meeting today, he said. The one worth $200 million. She waited. But I am not going because of the money. Why then, she asked. Because running away from responsibility is not the same as escaping ego. Her eyes softened slightly, not in admiration, but in approval of growth. That sounds like someone who is learning, she said. He hesitated before continuing. I do not want to test you anymore. The words were simple, stripped. I do not want to test anyone. I want to show up honestly. If you are still willing to see me. The morning traffic moved behind them, taxis passing, a bus sighing at the curb. Olivia looked down briefly, then back up. I was never afraid of seeing you, she said. I was waiting to see if you would let yourself be seen. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the single-dollar bill, now slightly creased from days of folding and unfolding. You gave me this, he said quietly. I think it was the first real investment anyone ever made in me. She smiled then, faint but genuine. It was bus fare, she corrected. No, he said. It was perspective. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air felt different. Lighter. He could have offered to buy the diner, to renovate it, to eliminate every financial strain she carried. The impulse flickered, then faded. Instead, he asked, after my meeting, would you have dinner with me? She raised an eyebrow slightly. At a place with white tablecloths and a violin in the corner. If that is what you want. She shook her head gently. I would prefer somewhere that does not require a reservation. He exhaled a quiet laugh. There is a pizza place on 7th that I used to go to before my company went public. Then let us go there, she said. As ourselves. He nodded. As ourselves. That afternoon, Ethan sat at the head of a polished conference table surrounded by men and women who had built empires alongside him. He listened more than he spoke. When the final proposal was presented, he asked different questions than usual. Not about maximum return, not about rapid expansion, but about sustainability. About the employees whose names would never appear in press releases. About the long-term impact beyond profit. His board noticed. So did he. When the meeting ended, the acquisition moved forward, but with terms adjusted. More balanced. Less ruthless. Walking out of the glass tower that had once defined him, Ethan felt a clarity that had nothing to do with numbers. That evening, he stood outside the small pizza shop on 7th Avenue, wearing no watch, holding no phone. Olivia arrived a minute later, hair down, jacket unbuttoned, eyes steady. You made it, she said. I said I would. They ordered 2 slices and sat by the window, knees brushing lightly beneath the narrow table. No photographers. No headlines. Just conversation that moved without agenda. He told her about his first failed startup at 23. She told him about the law degree she had paused to care for her mother. They spoke of mistakes without defensiveness, of hopes without calculation. At one point, he reached across the table and took her hand. Not as a claim, not as a test, but as a promise. She did not pull away. Outside, the city moved as it always had, loud and indifferent. Inside, something steady took root. He had faked poverty to measure love. She had responded with dignity instead of fascination. And in the space where deception dissolved, something real had finally been allowed to begin. The city did not slow down for love, but for Ethan. And Olivia, time seemed to stretch in quieter ways. A week after the pizza on 7th Avenue, their rhythm had settled into something unforced. He worked his mornings at the office again, not as a disappearing act this time, but as a leader recalibrating the way he measured success. She worked her shifts at Harbor Street Grill with the same steady composure. But now there was an ease in her step when the bell above the door chimed and he walked in, not as a disguise, but as himself. He never arrived with a driver. He never reserved a corner table. He stood in line like everyone else, hands in his coat pockets, waiting for his turn. The staff noticed. Marcus noticed most of all. You are different lately, Marcus muttered one afternoon while stacking plates. Ethan smiled faintly. I am trying to be. Olivia pretended not to hear, but her eyes softened at the edges. One evening, as the late sun filtered through the front windows, Ethan lingered by the counter while Olivia tallied receipts. I spoke with the board again, he said quietly. We are launching a new employee fund. Education grants. Healthcare support. Not for publicity. She looked up slowly. And why are you telling me? Because you are the reason I asked the questions that made it possible. She set the pen down. Do not make me your moral compass, she said gently. Make it your standard. The distinction mattered. He nodded. It is my standard now. Outside, a delivery truck rolled past, rattling the glass. Inside, the diner hummed with low conversations and the scent of fresh coffee. I have something to show you, he said after a moment. After your shift. She studied him carefully. Is this another surprise? No, he answered. It is transparency. That night, instead of the penthouse or a polished rooftop restaurant, he brought her to the Brooklyn townhouse he had returned to days earlier. The brick exterior was modest, the porch light slightly dim. "This is where I grew up," he said as they stepped inside. The living room was simple. Wooden floors, a worn sofa, framed photographs that carried more history than glamour. Olivia moved slowly through the space, pausing at a picture of a younger Ethan standing beside his mother. "She looks kind," she said. "She was," he replied. "She worked 2 jobs. Never complained. She told me once that money should solve problems, not create distance." He watched her take that in. "You built distance," she said softly. "I did," he admitted. "And I thought hiding would fix it." She turned toward him fully then. "Hiding protects pride," she said. "It does not build connection." He stepped closer, not to dominate the space, but to share it. "I do not want to protect pride anymore," he said. "I want to build something honest." The air felt still, grounded. He reached for her hand, this time without hesitation. "Olivia Hayes," he said quietly, "I do not need you to prove anything. I do not need you to choose me because I am wealthy or reject me because I am. I want you to choose me because I am trying to be a man worth standing beside." She held his gaze steadily, searching not for performance, but for alignment. "You are not finished growing," she said. "Neither am I." He smiled slightly. "Then we grow." Silence settled between them, not empty, but full of understanding. She stepped closer, resting her free hand lightly against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm beneath. "I do not love you because you were poor," she said softly. "And I do not love you because you are rich." His breath caught, just slightly. "You love me," he repeated. She nodded once. "Because when you stopped pretending, you listened. You changed. You stayed." The word stayed lingered in the room like something sacred. He exhaled slowly, the weight of years of guarded instinct dissolving into something steady and certain. "I love you too," he said, the confession free of spectacle. Outside, a train passed in the distance, the faint rumble grounding the moment in the ordinary world. Inside, nothing needed to be grand to be meaningful. He did not kneel. He did not present a ring. He simply held her hand tighter, as if anchoring himself to something real. In the weeks that followed, their lives did not become dramatic. They became deliberate. He continued leading his company, but with a clarity shaped by humility rather than ego. She resumed studying for the law degree she had paused, this time with his quiet encouragement, but without his interference. He did not offer to pay her tuition without being asked. She did not refuse partnership out of pride. They spoke about everything openly, from finances to fears, from ambition to doubt. And on a quiet Sunday morning, sitting side by side on the steps outside Harbor Street Grill before the city fully woke, Ethan looked at Olivia and realized something simple. He had once believed love required testing. She had shown him it required truth. He had once believed wealth defined his worth. She had shown him character did. He had pretended to be nothing in order to be chosen. She had chosen him only after he chose to be real. And in that choice, without headlines, without spectacle, they found something neither of them had to fake ever again. Autumn arrived without announcement, slipping into the city through cooler air and longer shadows that stretched across Harbor Street Grill each afternoon. The chalkboard outside now listed pumpkin pie beside the usual specials, and inside, the rhythm of the diner carried the quiet comfort of routine. Ethan no longer entered as a stranger, nor as a spectacle. He came as someone expected. Sometimes he arrived early to help stack chairs before opening. Sometimes he sat in the corner booth with a laptop closed, choosing conversation over conference calls. The employees had grown used to him, not as a benefactor, but as Olivia's partner. He preferred it that way. One evening, as the dinner rush thinned and the sky shifted from gold to deep blue, Olivia joined him at the counter with 2 mugs of coffee. "You missed your usual board call," she observed lightly. "I rescheduled it," he replied. "Apparently the company survives without me for 90 minutes. She smiled faintly. "That must be unsettling." "It is liberating," he corrected. He studied her face in the soft overhead light. There was a new energy about her lately, something focused and forward-looking. "How are the law classes?" he asked. She wrapped her hands around the mug, letting the steam rise between them. "Challenging," she admitted, "but in a way that feels honest." He nodded. "You do not have to prove anything to anyone." She met his gaze steadily. "I am not doing it to prove. I am doing it because I paused once out of necessity. I do not want to live paused." The words resonated. He understood that instinct now, the difference between survival and intention. Outside, a black sedan slowed briefly in front of the diner, then continued down the street. Ethan noticed, but did not react. He had instructed his driver weeks ago to keep distance. No more waiting engines. No more silent reminders of hierarchy. After closing, they walked together toward the Brooklyn townhouse, leaves crunching underfoot. The air smelled like wood smoke from a nearby building. The board invited us to a charity gala next month, he said casually. She glanced sideways. Us. If you would like to come, he clarified. Not as an accessory. As yourself. She considered it. Well, I need a gown that costs more than a semester of tuition. No, he said softly. Just your presence. She stopped walking for a moment, turning to face him fully beneath a street lamp. Ethan, she said, I am not afraid of your world. I know, but I am also not impressed by it. He smiled, genuine and unguarded. That is precisely why I want you there. She searched his expression for a hint of performance and found none. Then I will go, she said. But we leave early. He laughed quietly. Deal. A week later, the gala unfolded beneath chandeliers and polished marble floors, conversations layered with subtle competition and quiet calculation. Ethan stood tall but grounded, introducing Olivia not by credentials or wealth, but by her name. This is Olivia Hayes, he would say simply. She is studying law. No embellishment. No framing. She moved through the room with the same calm authority she carried in the diner, listening more than speaking, responding without flattery. At one point, a senior executive approached Ethan privately. You look different, the man remarked. Less guarded. Ethan glanced across the room where Olivia was speaking with a nonprofit director about housing rights. I am, he replied. I stopped negotiating my own worth. When they stepped outside later that evening, the cool air felt almost cleansing. Olivia slipped off her heels and held them in one hand, walking barefoot on the smooth pavement. That was overwhelming, she admitted. But not impossible. He took her free hand gently. Thank you for coming. She looked up at him. Thank you for not turning me into a statement. They reached the car, but he did not open the door immediately. Instead, he pulled the slightly creased dollar bill from his wallet, where it now rested behind his identification. I still carry this, he said. She raised an eyebrow. As a souvenir. As a reminder, he corrected, that the smallest investment can change the direction of a life. She smiled softly. You changed your own direction. Because you refused to let me hide, he said. The city hummed around them, traffic lights shifting from red to green, distant sirens echoing without urgency. He stepped closer, resting his forehead lightly against hers. I once believed love had to be tested, he murmured. Now I know it has to be trusted. She closed her eyes briefly, steady and certain. Trust is not blind, she said. It is chosen. He kissed her gently, not to claim, not to display, but to affirm what had already been built in quiet moments and honest conversations. Weeks turned into months. Olivia advanced in her studies, her confidence deepening. Ethan led his company with a new clarity, restructuring policies with empathy instead of fear. They continued to meet at Harbor Street Grill on Sunday mornings, sitting on the front steps with coffee as the city slowly woke. Passers-by rarely noticed them. There were no headlines about transformation, no articles about reinvention. Just two people who had once met beneath fluorescent lights and rain, now standing side by side without disguise. He had entered her life pretending to be nothing. She had answered not with fascination or rejection, but with dignity. And in the space where pretense dissolved, something enduring took root. Not because he was wealthy, not because she was resilient, but because when the costume fell away, they both chose to stay. Winter settled over the city with a quiet authority, frosting the edges of sidewalks and turning Harbor Street Grill into a refuge of warmth against the cold. Inside, the windows fogged easily, softening the view of passing traffic into blurred streaks of red and white. Olivia stood behind the counter one early December morning, reviewing notes for an upcoming exam between coffee refills. Ethan sat across from her in the corner booth, not with a laptop this time, but with a stack of printed proposals he had brought for her opinion. He no longer asked whether she wanted to be involved in his decisions. He asked what she thought. This housing initiative, he said, sliding one document toward her. If we fund it through the foundation instead of the corporation, it avoids certain tax advantages. She scanned the page quickly, her eyes sharp and analytical. Then fund it through the corporation. She replied, if you believe in it, let it cost you something. He leaned back, studying her with admiration that no longer needed to be disguised as curiosity. You realize you are the only person in my life who tells me to choose the harder route. The harder route is usually the honest one, she answered simply. Snow began falling lightly outside, drifting against the glass like quiet punctuation. Ethan watched the flakes gather along the curb and thought about the night he had first walked in during a storm, soaked and pretending. The memory felt distant now, almost like someone else's life. Do you ever regret that I tested you? He asked softly. Olivia closed her notebook, considering the question. I regret that you felt the need to, she said. But I do not regret that it brought you here. The distinction mattered. He reached into his coat pocket and felt the familiar crease of the single-dollar bill still tucked inside his wallet. He no longer carried it as proof of transformation. He carried it as gratitude. That afternoon, after her shift ended, they walked through Prospect Park, snow crunching beneath their boots. The trees stood bare and dignified against the gray sky. Ethan pulled his scarf tighter around his neck, glancing at her profile as she spoke about a constitutional law case she had been studying. Her voice carried conviction, not performance. You are going to be formidable, he said quietly. She laughed lightly. Formidable is a strange compliment. It means no one will be able to dismiss you, he clarified. She stopped walking, turning toward him in the quiet expanse of white. I was dismissed once, she said gently, when I chose to stay home and care for my mother. People assumed I lacked ambition. He held her gaze steadily. They were wrong. They were uninformed, she corrected. Ambition is not always loud. The air felt still, almost sacred in its silence. Ethan stepped closer, brushing a snowflake from her hair. I want to build a life with you, he said, the words simple and unadorned. She did not respond immediately. She searched his expression, not for doubt, but for depth. A life, she repeated. Not a performance. Not a performance, he confirmed. No hidden conditions. No experiments. Just partnership. Her breath clouded in the cold as she exhaled slowly. Partnership means standing through seasons, she said. Not just the dramatic ones. I am done chasing drama, he replied. I would rather choose steadiness. She smiled then, not wide, but certain. Then choose it with me. He did not kneel in the snow. He did not reach for a velvet box. Instead, he took both of her hands in his, warming them between his palms. Olivia Hayes, he said softly, I choose you in the quiet. I choose you when no one is watching. I choose you without disguise. Her eyes shimmered, not from spectacle, but from recognition. Ethan Whitmore, she answered. I choose you when you are certain and when you are uncertain. I choose you when you are powerful and when you are learning. I choose you because you stayed. Snow continued falling, gentle and unhurried. In the distance, children laughed near a frozen pond, their voices echoing lightly across the park. Ethan leaned forward and kissed her, the gesture steady and warm against the cold air. It was not a claim. It was an agreement. Weeks later, back at Harbor Street Grill, a small framed photograph appeared near the register. It showed Ethan and Olivia standing side by side in the park, snow dusting their coats, their expressions calm and unguarded. Marcus had placed it there without comment. Customers noticed sometimes. Most did not. The diner remained the same. The coffee still brewed strong. The chalkboard still changed daily. But something within its walls had shifted permanently. He had once believed love required proof. She had answered with patience. He had once believed wealth determined loyalty. She had answered with dignity. And in choosing each other without disguise, they discovered that the greatest investment was never money, but the courage to be seen and the decision to stay. Spring arrived quietly, melting the last traces of snow along the sidewalks and filling Harbor Street Grill with a softer light that lingered longer each evening. The framed photograph near the register remained in place, a silent witness to a season that had changed more than the weather. Olivia balanced her final semester with steady determination, her textbooks now stacked beside the coffee machine during slower shifts. Ethan adjusted his schedule to match hers without announcement, attending fewer late dinners and more early mornings at the diner, sitting across from her while she highlighted case law and explained arguments with calm precision. Their life did not expand in spectacle. It deepened in detail. One afternoon, As sunlight filtered through the open front windows, a young couple entered the diner arguing softly over unpaid bills. Olivia listened while refilling their water glasses, her tone measured and firm as she reminded them that frustration does not solve what patience can. Ethan watched from the counter, noticing how she steadied others without overpowering them. Later, when the couple left calmer than they arrived, he leaned toward her and said, "You changed the temperature of a room without raising your voice." She shrugged lightly. People respond to dignity more than volume. He considered how long it had taken him to learn that same truth. A week later, Olivia received the email she had been waiting for. She stood behind the counter reading it twice, then a third time, her breath catching only slightly. Ethan approached quietly, sensing the shift. "Good news?" he asked softly. She looked up, eyes bright but composed. "I was accepted into the internship program at the Housing Rights Clinic." He did not shout or lift her into the air. He simply wrapped his arms around her and held her steady. "They chose well," he said into her hair. She laughed gently against his shoulder. "They chose potential," she corrected. That evening, they returned to Prospect Park, now green and alive with early blossoms. They sat on a wooden bench overlooking the pond where children once laughed in winter, now replaced by joggers and families with strollers. "Do you remember the first night?" Ethan asked, his voice thoughtful. "When you walked in pretending?" She replied without looking at him. "Yes." He smiled faintly. "I thought I was controlling the outcome." She turned toward him. "You were controlling the circumstances," she said. "Outcomes belong to truth." The breeze carried the scent of new leaves, subtle and promising. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had not dropped the wallet?" he asked. She tilted her head slightly. "I would have found another way to measure you," she said calmly. He laughed softly. "You are relentless." "I am attentive," she corrected again. They sat in silence for a moment, watching ripples move across the water. "The board offered me a promotion today," he added after a pause. "Chairman." She glanced at him, assessing not the title, but the weight behind it. "Do you want it?" she asked. "I want responsibility," he answered slowly. "Not status." She nodded. "Then accept the responsibility." The simplicity of her guidance steadied him once more. That weekend, Harbor Street Grill hosted a small gathering after closing. Nothing elaborate, just friends, co-workers, and a homemade cake Marcus insisted on baking. Ethan stood near the counter where he had once pretended to be invisible, now speaking openly about the employee fund his company had launched and the legal clinic Olivia would soon join. There was no spotlight, no announcement, just shared pride. At one point, Marcus raised a mug and said, "To honesty. It saves time." Laughter rippled through the room. Olivia reached for Ethan's hand beneath the counter, squeezing lightly. Later, as they cleaned up together, she looked around the quiet diner and said, "This place saw us begin." He nodded. "It reminds me who I am." She stepped closer, resting her forehead briefly against his. "And who you chose to become," she added. The lights dimmed one by one as they locked up for the night. Outside, the air felt warm and steady, the city alive but not overwhelming. Ethan slipped the familiar $1 from his wallet and handed it back to her. "I think it belongs to you now," he said softly. She looked at it, then back at him. "It was never about the money," she said. "I know." She folded it carefully and placed it in the pocket of her jacket. "Then let it remind us," she said, "that love is not measured by wealth or by tests. It is measured by who stays when the costume falls." He nodded, feeling the truth of it settle deeply. As they walked down the sidewalk side by side, hands intertwined without hesitation, Ethan understood something that no acquisition or headline had ever taught him. He had entered her world seeking proof. He had found partnership. He had once believed that to be chosen, he needed to disguise himself. Now he knew that to be loved, he needed only to be real. And in choosing each other openly, without performance or condition, they built a future grounded not in pretense, but in presence. Summer arrived with longer evenings and a kind of golden light that lingered on the brick walls of Harbor Street Grill long after closing time. The diner doors stayed open a little later now, letting in warm air and the sound of distant street musicians playing saxophone near the subway entrance. Olivia had completed her internship at the Housing Rights Clinic and now split her time between the diner and the small legal office downtown. where she helped families navigate leases and paperwork with the same steady patience she once offered customers over coffee. Ethan had officially accepted the role of chairman at his company, but the title sat differently on him than any position before. It was no longer armor. It was responsibility. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of amber and pink, Ethan waited outside the clinic building where Olivia worked. He leaned against a lamppost, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, watching people stream past with briefcases and backpacks. When she emerged through the glass doors, carrying a folder tucked beneath her arm, she paused when she saw him. "You look like you have been thinking," she said as she approached. "I have," he admitted. They began walking toward the subway station, moving in easy step. "The company is expanding again," he continued. "New offices in Chicago, possibly San Francisco next year." She listened without interruption. "They want me to relocate for a while," he finished. The noise of the city filled the brief silence between them. "Do you want to?" she asked carefully. "I want to lead well," he said. "But I do not want to build something that costs me what we have." She stopped near the entrance to the station and turned to face him fully. "Then do not treat it as a choice between the two," she said. "Treat it as a design problem." He smiled faintly. "You sound like a strategist." "I am a future lawyer," she reminded him. "We look for solutions, not ultimatums." He exhaled slowly. "I spent years believing success required sacrifice," he said. "That you had to give something up to gain something else." "Sometimes you do," she replied gently. "But not if you are willing to redefine success." The word redefine lingered with weight. That night, instead of returning to the townhouse, they sat on the front steps of Harbor Street Grill after closing, the city warm and humming around them. Marcus had left a small fan running inside to circulate air, and the faint smell of baked pie drifted through the open window. "What does success look like to you?" Ethan asked quietly. Olivia leaned back on her hands, gazing at the darkening sky. "It looks like impact without arrogance," she said. "It looks like work that aligns with values. It looks like coming home at the end of the day and knowing you did not have to pretend." He nodded slowly. "And us?" She turned her head slightly. "We are part of that," she answered. "But not the only measure." He appreciated the honesty. She did not cling. She chose. The following week, Ethan stood before his executive team and proposed a restructuring plan that allowed him to split his time between New York and the expanding offices without uprooting his life entirely. It required trust. It required delegation. It required him to loosen his grip on control. Some board members hesitated. Others questioned the optics. But he held steady. "Leadership is not about presence in every room," he said calmly. "It is about clarity in every decision." When the vote passed, he felt not triumph, but alignment. Later that evening, he met Olivia at a small bookstore cafe near the clinic. She was reviewing notes for an upcoming exam, glasses perched lightly on her nose. He slid into the seat across from her. "It is done," he said simply. She closed her book and smiled. "You designed it," she replied. He reached across the table, brushing his thumb gently along her knuckles. "I had a good consultant." She shook her head softly. "You had courage." Outside, the streetlights flickered on one by one, casting a warm glow over the sidewalk. Inside, the cafe filled with the quiet rustle of pages turning. "There is something else," he added after a moment. "The foundation is launching a scholarship in my mother's name, for students who pause their education to care for family." Olivia's eyes softened instantly. "That is beautiful," she said. "It is overdue," he replied. "You reminded me that staying is not weakness." She reached across the table and rested her hand over his heart. "You learned," she said. "That is what matters." As the months continued unfolding, their life did not become easier in the dramatic sense. There were long days, tight schedules, occasional disagreements about timing and priorities, but they faced each one without disguise. When tension rose, they spoke plainly. When doubt surfaced, they listened without defensiveness. And on a warm August night, sitting once again on the steps outside Harbor Street Grill, Ethan looked at Olivia and felt something deeper than certainty. He felt gratitude. He had entered her life with a test disguised as humility. She had answered with integrity disguised as simplicity. And in the seasons that followed, they built something that did not require proving. It required presence. He no longer wondered whether she loved him for who he was. He knew. Because when the titles shifted, when opportunities expanded, When decisions demanded clarity, she did not ask what he could provide. She asked who he chose to be. And each time, without costume or condition, he chose to stand beside her. Early September carried a different kind of light, softer at the edges, as if the city itself understood that something was shifting again. Harbor Street Grill remained steady, its familiar scent of coffee and warm bread greeting regulars each morning. But Olivia no longer worked as many shifts behind the counter. Her internship had turned into a formal position at the Housing Rights Clinic, and her days now stretched between court filings, client meetings, and late-night reading sessions at the townhouse dining table. Ethan adjusted without being asked. He learned which evenings required silence while she studied, and which ones needed takeout containers spread across the table so she would remember to eat. He no longer filled space with solutions. He filled it with presence. One afternoon, as leaves began to hint at gold along the sidewalks, Olivia returned home with a file pressed tightly against her chest. She set it down carefully, exhaling as if releasing something heavier than paper. "Rough day," Ethan observed gently. She nodded, slipping off her shoes near the door. "A family is being evicted despite every document being in order," she said. "A technicality. A careless signature from years ago." He listened without interrupting, watching the way frustration flickered behind her calm exterior. "Can you fix it?" he asked. "I can try," she replied. "But trying is not always enough." He stepped closer, resting his hands lightly on her shoulders. "You once told me that impact matters more than volume," he said. "You are making impact." She leaned into him for a moment, drawing strength from steadiness rather than reassurance. "It is easier when I am helping strangers," she admitted softly. "It is harder when the system feels bigger than." Compassion. Ethan understood that tension. He had once built systems that valued efficiency over empathy. Now he worked to balance both. "Then we widen the system," he said thoughtfully. "Not with charity. With structure." She pulled back slightly, studying his expression. "What are you thinking?" "Pro bono legal partnerships, through the foundation," he answered. "Not publicity. Real collaboration. You lead the advisory board." She hesitated. "I do not want to become your project," she said quietly. He shook his head. "You are not a project. You are a partner. If this ever feels like a spotlight instead of support, we stop." She searched his face and found no trace of ego, only intention. "Then we build it together," she said. The following weeks unfolded with deliberate focus. Olivia gathered colleagues from the clinic, outlining what communities truly needed instead of what donors assumed they needed. Ethan met with executives, redirecting funds without fanfare, ensuring that the initiative would function quietly and sustainably. Their conversations were not always smooth. There were evenings when spreadsheets clashed with legal realities, when deadlines pressed too tightly. But they did not retreat into silence. They leaned forward. One Sunday morning, back on the steps outside Harbor Street Grill, Marcus joined them briefly with 3 paper cups of coffee. "You two look like you are planning a revolution," he joked. Olivia smiled faintly. "Just an adjustment," she replied. Marcus nodded knowingly. "Adjustments change more than revolutions," he said before heading back inside. Ethan glanced at her, amused. "He is wiser than he pretends." "Most people are," she answered. As autumn deepened, the foundation launched its legal partnership without press releases or galas. The first case resolved quietly in favor of a tenant who had nearly lost her home over a clerical error. Olivia stood outside the courthouse that afternoon, the crisp air sharp against her cheeks, and allowed herself one steady breath of satisfaction. Ethan met her on the courthouse steps, not with flowers or applause, but with a simple embrace. "You did it," he said softly. She shook her head gently. "We did it." The distinction mattered. That evening, back at the townhouse, they sat at the kitchen table surrounded by files and takeout containers, the hum of the refrigerator steady in the background. "Do you ever miss the anonymity?" she asked suddenly. "Before everything intertwined." He considered the question carefully. "I miss simplicity," he admitted, "but not the distance." She reached across the table and intertwined her fingers with his. "Then we protect simplicity," she said. "Not by shrinking our lives, but by guarding our values." He nodded slowly. "You make it sound easy." "It is not easy," she replied. "It is intentional." Outside, wind brushed against the windows, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. Ethan thought about the first storm that had brought him to the diner, about the single dollar that had shifted his perspective, about the months of growth that followed. He had once measured love by reaction, by whether someone would choose him without knowing his wealth. Now he measured it by consistency, by who remained steady when circumstances expanded rather than contracted. Olivia closed her file and leaned back in her chair, eyes thoughtful. "You know," she said quietly, "if you had walked in that night as yourself, I might not have noticed you." He smiled gently. "And if you had been impressed by the costume, I might not have stayed." They shared a quiet understanding in that admission. Growth had not erased their past missteps. It had transformed them. As the evening settled and the city dimmed beyond the townhouse windows, Ethan reached for her hand once more, not out of uncertainty, but gratitude. They had moved beyond the test, beyond the disguise, beyond the need to prove. What remained was simpler and stronger than either of them expected. Two people who chose alignment over advantage, presence over performance. And in choosing that, day after day, they continued building a life that did not need to be hidden or explained. It only needed to be lived. Late October arrived with crisp mornings and a kind of clarity that made the city feel sharpened at the edges. The trees lining Prospect Park burned in shades of amber and rust, and Harbor Street Grill displayed small pumpkins along the counter, their bright orange contrasting against the familiar dark wood. Olivia's caseload at the clinic had grown steadily, but so had her confidence. She no longer hesitated before speaking in court. She no longer second-guessed her instincts. Ethan watched the evolution with quiet admiration, noticing how her voice carried weight not because it was loud, but because it was anchored. One evening, after a long day at the office, he stood alone in his conference room overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city lights flickered on one by one beneath him, a reminder of the scale he once believed defined him. He thought about the early months of their relationship, about the experiment he had engineered out of insecurity, about the disguise he had worn like armor. The memory no longer embarrassed him. It instructed him. His phone buzzed softly with a message from Olivia. Finished at the clinic. Coffee at the diner. He smiled at the simplicity of it. No gala. No reservation. Just coffee. By the time he reached Harbor Street Grill, the evening rush had thinned. Olivia sat in the corner booth with a stack of files pushed aside, 2 mugs already waiting. She looked tired, but steady. "You look like you solved something," he said as he slid into the seat across from her. She wrapped her hands around her mug, absorbing its warmth. "The eviction case," she replied. "We found a clause buried in an amendment from 8 years ago. It protects the tenant." The landlord did not expect anyone to read that far. Ethan's eyes softened. "You read that far." She gave a small shrug. "Details matter." He nodded slowly. Remembering the first night, she had noticed the details he thought invisible. "You once told me that patience reveals character," he said. "I am starting to think patience also reveals truth." She tilted her head slightly. "Truth does not hide well," she answered. "Ego does." The diner hummed quietly around them, a few late customers speaking in low tones near the window. Marcus wiped down tables with deliberate care, pretending not to listen. Ethan reached into his coat pocket and placed a small folded document on the table between them. Olivia looked down at it, then back at him. "What is this?" "A proposal," he said simply. She unfolded it carefully. The document outlined the legal advisory board they had discussed months ago, now fully structured and funded for 5 years. At the bottom, beneath the official language and signatures, was a single line, "Chairperson, Olivia Hayes." She looked up slowly, eyes searching his face for any trace of performance. "You said partnership," she murmured. "I meant it," he replied. "This is not my project. It is ours. And you lead it." She inhaled softly, absorbing the weight of the gesture. "You are not afraid of stepping back," she observed. "I am afraid of building. Something without you in it," he answered honestly. Silence settled between them, not heavy, but full. Outside, wind rustled fallen leaves across the sidewalk. "Do you remember what you asked me months ago?" she said quietly. "What happens when you stop pretending?" He nodded. "This," she said, gesturing gently between them and the paper. "This happens." He felt the truth of it in his chest. He had once feared that revealing his full identity would drive her away. Instead, revealing it had built trust. "There is something else," he added softly. She raised an eyebrow. "You have said that before." He smiled faintly. "This time it is simpler." He reached for her hand across the table, fingers interlacing naturally. I do not want to measure our life by milestones or headlines, he said. I want to measure it by consistency, by mornings like this, by evenings at this booth, by the way we face challenges without disguises. Her gaze softened, unwavering. And what does that look like? She asked. It looks like choosing you every day, he replied. Not because of who you are becoming, not because of what we are building, but because you are the one person who saw me when I tried to disappear. Her eyes shimmered slightly, though her voice remained steady. You tried to disappear behind poverty, she said. Now you stand fully visible. He nodded. Because you refused to applaud the costume. The clock above the counter ticked softly, marking time without urgency. Olivia folded the document carefully and placed it back on the table. Then let us continue, she said. Without costumes. Without tests. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forehead gently against hers across the narrow booth table. Without fear, he added. Without fear, she echoed. The world beyond the diner windows moved as it always had. Taxis passing, strangers hurrying home, lights blinking in distant apartment buildings. Inside Harbor Street Grill, 2 mugs of coffee cooled slowly, untouched for a moment as they sat quietly, aware that what they had built required no announcement. He had once entered her life disguised as nothing, hoping to be chosen. She had chosen him only after he chose honesty. And now, in the steady glow of a place that had witnessed every stage of their becoming, they understood something simple and enduring. Love was never about proving worth. It was about revealing it, then, standing unguarded beside the person who sees it clearly and stays. The first snow of December arrived quietly again, almost exactly 1 year after the night everything began. Harbor Street Grill looked the same from the outside, brick warmed by yellow light. Chalkboard sign leaning slightly to the left, the bell above the door ready to announce whoever stepped in from the cold. Inside, nothing dramatic had changed. The coffee still brewed strong. The counter still carried faint scratches from years of use. The framed photograph of Ethan and Olivia in the snow still rested near the register. But for those who paid attention, there was a difference in the air. It was steadier. That evening, the diner closed early for a private gathering. Not a gala. Not a press event, just family, friends, clinic colleagues, a few executives who had learned to remove their titles at the door, and Marcus standing proudly behind the counter pretending he was not emotional. Olivia stood near the window, wearing a simple ivory dress that moved softly when she turned. There were no diamonds at her neck, no spectacle. Ethan stood across the room speaking quietly with an elderly woman from the housing clinic who insisted on bringing homemade cookies as a gift. He listened to her story with the same attention he once reserved for investors. When he finally crossed the room toward Olivia, the conversations dimmed without instruction. Not because of wealth, but because of intention. He stopped in front of her, hands steady, eyes clear. A year ago, he had walked through that same door pretending to be invisible. Now he stood fully seen. Do you remember what you said the first night? He asked softly. She smiled faintly. You were not as good at pretending as you thought. He nodded. You were right. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and folded. Not a velvet box. Not a display. The same $1 bill, now carefully pressed and framed in a simple glass case. On the back, in small handwriting, were 3 words: stay, choose, build. The room remained quiet, but not tense. Just attentive. This was never about money, he continued. It was about perspective. You gave me this the night I thought I was testing you. You were teaching me. Her eyes softened, but she did not interrupt. I once believed love had to survive poverty to be real, he said. Now I know it has to survive truth. He took a slow breath. Olivia Hayes, you saw me before I was brave enough to be honest. You chose me after I stopped hiding. You challenged me without humiliating me. You stood steady when I tried to control the narrative. I do not want to test love ever again. I want to protect it. I do not want to measure worth by numbers. I want to measure it by character. And every day beside you, I learn what that means. The snow outside thickened slightly, drifting past the window like quiet applause from the sky. So tonight, he said gently, I am not asking you to prove anything. I am not asking you to pass a test. I am asking you to continue choosing this life with me, to build with me, to stay with me. He knelt then, not out of performance, but humility, holding not just a ring, but the framed dollar between them. The ring itself was simple. A round stone set in understated gold. Nothing excessive. Nothing loud. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, not because she doubted him, but because she understood the weight of yes. A year ago, she had refused to be impressed by wealth. Tonight, she refused to be overwhelmed by romance. She focused only on truth. Ethan Whitmore, she said softly. I never needed you to be poor to trust you. I needed you to be honest. You learned. You changed. You stayed. I choose you not because you built an empire, but because you built integrity. I choose you not because you knelt, but because you stood accountable. And I will continue choosing you as long as we both remain willing to grow. She extended her hand. Yes. The word was quiet. Certain. The room exhaled collectively, but there was no cheering at first. Only a wave of warmth that moved through everyone present. Marcus wiped his eyes openly this time. The elderly woman from the clinic nodded as if she had expected nothing less. Ethan slid the ring onto Olivia's finger, then stood, not towering over her, but standing beside her. They did not kiss dramatically. He rested his forehead against hers, just as he had done in the park, just as he had done at the diner booth. A gesture, repeated not for show, but for grounding. Later, when the small celebration thinned and the lights dimmed, they stepped outside together. Snow covered the sidewalk in a thin white layer, softening the city noise. Harbor Street Grill stood behind them, witness to every stage of their becoming. Ethan looked down at the framed dollar still in his hand. Where should we keep it? He asked. Olivia considered the question. Not in a vault, she said lightly. Not hidden. She pointed toward the diner window. There. The next morning, the framed dollar hung beside the photograph near the register, visible to anyone who cared to notice. Most customers assumed it was decoration. A curiosity. Only a few knew it represented the moment pride gave way to honesty. Weeks later, as winter deepened and wedding plans unfolded with the same simplicity that defined their story, Ethan found himself back in the conference room overlooking the city skyline. The lights below shimmered in the dusk. He no longer saw them as measures of success. He saw them as reminders of responsibility. His phone buzzed with a message from Olivia. Do not forget milk on your way home. He smiled. Chairman, founder, fiancé. None of those titles steadied him the way that simple message did. He left the office early that night. Back at the townhouse, Olivia sat at the kitchen table reviewing final details for the legal advisory board expansion. She looked up as he entered, holding a small grocery bag. Milk, he said. She smiled. Consistency, she replied. He set the bag down and crossed the room, kissing her gently, unhurried. Do you ever think about how it started? He asked. She laughed softly. With you pretending. With you noticing, he corrected. They stood there in the quiet kitchen, snow brushing against the window, the hum of the refrigerator steady in the background. The quiet ones are never ordinary, he said thoughtfully. She tilted her head. Neither are the ones willing to unlearn themselves, she answered. And in that simple exchange, they understood the full circle of it all. He had walked into her life, carrying wealth and insecurity disguised as humility. She had answered with dignity disguised as simplicity. Together, they dismantled performance and replaced it with partnership. They did not erase the past. They refined it. They did not chase dramatic love. They cultivated deliberate love. And as the year closed where it began, beneath snow and soft diner lights, they stood side by side not because of a test passed, but because of a truth chosen. Love had not been proven through poverty. It had been revealed through character. And character, once seen clearly, is impossible to ignore. If this story touched you, leave a comment, share where you are watching from, and how would you rate this story. And if you want more powerful journeys like this one, do not forget to like this video and subscribe to Love After Everything for more heartfelt stories about strength, dignity, and choosing love when it matters most.